Hi, everyone. This is Miss Esposito. Today we are going to talk about ratio tables. It's just another way to solve problems with ratios. So what you need for today is student handout number 4, which is page 7 in your notes. And you will also need page 8 in your notes. So page 7 and 8 from your notes are the pages we're going to use today. All right, so let's get started from the top. First of all, a ratio table is a way to compare quantities. So if we look at number 1, it says Todd earns $3 for every 5 chores he completes on his chore chart. Find equivalent ratios using the ratio table. Well, if we're talking about chores, we know that he earns $3 for every 5 chores. So one thing we can do is go ahead and mark down that ratio. So if he does 5 chores, he earns $3. Well, the next ratio that I know is if he does 10 chores. Okay? If he does 10 chores, then he's going to get $6. All right? I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this table, and I'm going to go up by 5s because that makes it easy for me to know how much money he gets. If he does 15 chores, then he's going to get $3 more, and so that will be 9. If he does 20 chores, then he'll get $3 more, and that's going to be 12. And then to finish out this table, we're going to do 25 chores and $15. Okay? Now, if I were to write these ratios, I would put 5 colon 3 for the top one, right? For the next one, I would put 10 colon 6, 15 colon 9, right? 20 colon 12, or 25 and 15. And again, all I did was rewrite these ratios over here as a ratio. Again, we know there are 3 ways we can write ratios, but for tables, it's helpful to just use the colon. The next thing we're going to do is answer these questions, and that's going to tell us a little bit more about this chart on the top. So for A, it says, how are the number of chores and the amounts of money earned related? Well, we already know from what they told us in the problem and from looking at the chart that for every 5 chores, he earns $3. Okay. Oh, sorry, I hit my camera. For every 5 chores, he earns $3. B, how are the values in the chores column related? So if we look at this column, the chores column, it's asking how are those values related? Well, there are 2 ways that we can look at that. We can look and we can say, well, if I add 5 each time, it's going to get me to the next number, okay? But there's another way to look at this, because what if I needed to know if he did 100 chores, and I didn't want to write out all these 5s all the way up to 100? Well, if you look at this, you can see that the top is 5 times 1. The second one is 5 times 2. The next one is 5 times 3. We have 5 times 4. We have 5 times 5. And so if I wanted to get the next one, I could take 5 times 6. Okay. So they are related by 5s. And I'm going to go ahead up here and just write for B, increases by 5. But there are 2 ways you can look at that chores column and see how they're related. Each time they increase by 5, or we can use multiplication and multiply by 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 and keep going up. All right, let's answer C. C says, how are the values in the money column related? Well, this is also going to have 2 ways to look at it, okay? So again, we can add 3 each time, right? That's adding. Or you can look and do the same thing that we did with the chores and use multiplication and see that this is going to be 3 times 1. It's getting a little messy here, I'm sorry. This will be 3 times 2. And here we have 3 times 3. And this one is 3 times 4. And so remember when we were doing ratios before, if we multiply by the same number, we get an equivalent ratio. So if I were to look at the 2 ratios, 5 and 3, and let's look at 25 and 15, I can see that if I multiply 5 times 5, I get 25. And if I multiply 3 times 5, which is the same number, I'm going to get 15. And so that's how I know that these are equivalent ratios. And so every time you go down in this column, it gives you equivalent ratios because we're multiplying the numbers by the same factor. Okay. All right, let's look at C. How are the values in the money column related? Oh, we just did that. They increased by 3. So for D, what do you notice about the ratio column? And I think that they're talking about this column. These are the ratios. What do we notice about the ratio column? If we look at every one of these ratios, and we know we've already talked about simplifying ratios in the past couple lessons, we can see that each one of these ratios is going to simplify to 5 to 3. This one, the 10 to 6, will simplify if I divide by 2. Right? So if I divide by 2, I get 5. And if I divide by 2 here, I get 3. If I take both of these numbers and I divide by 3, I'm going to get 5 to 3. If I take both of these numbers and I divide by 4, I'm going to get 5 to 3. And if I take this ratio and I divide by 5, I'm going to get 5 to 3. All of these ratios will simplify down to 5 to 3, which is exactly what we started with. Now, it's not always going to be exactly what you start with, but we always want to simplify our ratios and get them down to the simplest terms. So for D, what do we notice about the ratio column? They all simplify to 5 to 3. All right, that is how you use a ratio table. Let's do number 2. Number 2 says, Mr. Baker is making pancakes and reads the recipe on the back of the pancake box. Use the information in the table to determine the ratio of the cups of pancake mix to cups of water. So we have this table here. We have our pancake mix in the left column and cups of water in the right column. And then it wants us to write the ratio in this column. So the first thing I'm going to do is just carry this ratio over, okay? So I know my first ratio is 1 to 1.5. The second ratio is 2 to 3. The third ratio is 3 to 4.5, and the fourth ratio is 4 to 6. Now, when we write ratios, there are two things we always need to do, okay? Writing ratios, okay? So if I were to ask for the ratio of this table, the first thing you want to do is look for the most simplified ratio. And the second thing you want to do is know that ratios are written with whole numbers, okay? So if I asked you for the ratio of pancakes to water, ratio of pancake mix to water, in this case, we can't use this ratio up here because it has a decimal. It's not a whole number. So we go to the next most simple ratio, okay? So the ratio of pancake mix to water is always 2 to 3. That's our most simplified ratio using whole numbers, okay? Now, if we want to answer A, it asks us how many cups of pancake mix will be needed if there are 15 cups of water. I'm going to get a different color here. And I'm going to use my table, okay? If I have 15 cups of water, I need to figure out how many cups of pancake mix I need. Well, if we use the numbers that we already have, we want to find a number that's easy to multiply something by to get 15, okay? So 1.5 times something is not easy to use, but 3 is easy to figure out how to get to 15. If I take 3 and I multiply it by 5, I know that's going to give me 15. So I'm going to use this ratio to figure out my missing piece. So if I took 3 and multiplied 3 by 5, I'm going to have to do the same thing to the 2. I'm going to take 2 and I'm going to multiply it by 5, and that's going to give me my missing ratio, 10. So I know that I need 10 cups of pancake mix. Okay, let's move to number 3. Or actually, let's do this table at the top, and then I'm going to have you guys try number 3, and we'll check it. All right, at the top, ratio tables are both, this is kind of a review, it's things I've just discussed, up and down, all right? And what that means, up and down, or across. Sorry, fix that. Ratios can go up and down, or they can go across. And again, I'm just going to explain what we've already done, okay? Up and down is if I take times 2 here, or if I do times 3, it gets me to the 6, or if I do times 4, it gets me to the 8. If I do the same thing over here, times 2 gets me from 3 to 6. Times 3 gets me to the 9. Times 4. So that's how I'm making equivalent ratios, is by multiplying by the same number each time. If I wanted to find the next equivalent ratio, I would take both of these numbers and multiply by 5. Okay? If I did that, I would go 2 times 5, and that would give me 10. And then I would take 3 times 5, and that would give me 15. And that's the next equivalent ratio. Okay? That's how we can go up and down. We can also go across, and we go across by finding the ratio factor. Okay? You can find the ratio factor by dividing. So if I were to take 3 divided by 2, that gives me 1.5. 1.5 is what I get when I take 3 divided by 2. Basically, what that means is I can, every single time, multiply by 1.5. And that gives me this missing piece. So if I have this over here, if I have yards of fabric and I want to get to number of pillows, I can just take that number and multiply by 5, and it will tell me how many pillows I will need. So for example, if I have 12 yards of fabric and I need to know how many pillows, I could just take 12 times 1.5, and that's going to give me 18. And that is another equivalent ratio. And again, if we are looking at these ratios and we want to write the ratio of yards of fabric to number of pillows in one simplified ratio, it's going to be 2 to 3, because that's the most simple ratio that we have when we're looking at these ratios, and it's whole numbers. So the ratio is always 2 to 3. That's the simplified version. All right, I'm going to have you guys do number 3, and then we are going to quickly check it just to see if you can finish this ratio table and answer question A and B. Let's check number 3. Number 3 says a cookie recipe calls for 3 eggs for every 2 dozen cookies. So let's write what they gave us. 3 eggs, 2 dozen cookies. It wants to know how many eggs will be needed for 60 dozen cookies. So this is 60. I'm going to kind of leave some spaces here. 60. So again, what we do with the ratio table is we decide what do we multiply by to get from 2 to 60. And then we're going to do the exact same thing to get that one. All right. So in this case, I'm going to multiply by 30. And then I need to take 3 times 30, and that's going to give me 90. 90 eggs for 60 dozen cookies. Number 4 says how many cookies can be made with 12 eggs. So I'm going to use a different color. And here I have 12 eggs, and I need to figure out how many cookies can be made, right? And so again, we look at these two numbers and we say, how did I get from 3 to 12? Well, I multiplied by 4. So in order to figure out how many cookies, I'm going to take the 2 and I'm going to multiply by 4, and that's going to give me 8. 8 cookies from 12 with 12 dozen eggs. Okay, we're going to do number 4 and 5 at a later date, maybe together on our live meet. I will see you guys soon.